So, this lecture is going to be on chapter 14, which is motivation and affect. We will review what motivation is. We're going to talk a little bit about flow and get into basic human needs. We're also going to talk about the individual differences we see in motivation, and we'll wrap up this lecture by kind of talking about anxiety and how it kind of affects learning. And more specifically, we'll get into test anxiety, how to keep your anxiety at a healthy level, and then finally, what we can do as instructors to create a motivating environment. So I like this one. It's not that I'm lazy, it's just that I don't care. And I think that this describes the concept of motivation pretty well, or maybe a lack of motivation. So motivation helps to direct our behavior towards particular goals. It can lead to increased effort and energy in pursuing our goals, increased initiation and persistence when we run into things that are tough. It can affect our cognitive processes in terms of what we pay attention to and what we end up elaborating on and really storing in our memory. And then finally, it can determine, to go back to behaviorism, which consequences we find reinforcing and which ones we find punishing. So motivation is often broken down into two types, right? We have extrinsic motivation, which is when the source of the motivation lies outside of the individual. So an example of this is, I wouldn't file my taxes if I didn't get a refund, or if I didn't think that, not filing my taxes would lead to some kind of fine, something along those lines, right? And a lot of the times I go the speed limit because I want to avoid getting a ticket. So those are extrinsic sources of motivation for me, right? Intrinsic motivation is when you have kind of this natural motivation or passion for a task. So an example here might be, volunteering because you enjoy it, it makes you feel good, or going the speed limit because you feel good about keeping others safe, right? That would be, those would be forms of intrinsic motivation. So Porter and Lawler have given us a nice model of motivation, and this isn't something I want you to know in depth, but I want you to kind of see the different aspects involved here. So, we put forth effort, and that is going to lead to our performance, right? But there are things that influence this. So our perception of the task, our perception of our ability to accomplish the task are going to influence our performance. And then that performance is going to, either have kind of these intrinsic rewards, these natural rewards that come to us, or these extrinsic rewards. And those are going to influence our satisfaction with our effort and our performance, right? And that influences the value of the rewards, and then finally whether or not we felt like engaging in that effort was really worth it, right? And it's going to influence our future behavior in that we now have kind of this reward effort expectation. So motivation kind of goes naturally into this discussion of flow. So from your book, Ormond talks about flow as an intense form of intrinsic motivation involving kind of complete absorption in a task and concentration on something that's challenging. So that's another key here, is that you're kind of intensely motivated to engage in something that is potentially intensely challenging. So how does it feel to actually be in flow? People report that when they're experiencing flow, they feel completely involved or focused, deeply concentrating on whatever the task is at hand. And this might be because of kind of this innate curiosity, or because of tons of training. So you could think about a marathon runner and how they get to a certain point in the race where maybe they experience kind of the sensation of flow. They don't really feel in pain anymore. They might experience a sense of kind of ecstasy, or even like a greater inner clarity. They kind of have finally figured out what needs to be done and how well it's going. they might finally be experiencing the sense that they're actually going to be able to accomplish this, right? That it's an achievable task, even though it's really challenging. And a lot of times people report experiencing kind of a sense of serenity. So they don't really have any worries anymore. They just feel at peace about what they're doing. Many people feel like they report losing their sense of time. So they're so intensely focused on the present moment that they don't even notice what's necessarily happening around them. And then finally, when you kind of are able to achieve this sense of flow, it becomes really, really reinforcing. And so you're going to be more likely to keep at it, right? And that's why I think a lot of people who complete marathons end up wanting to, continue doing them, despite the fact that it's pretty hard for me to understand. Flow might be able to kind of explain that. So, in terms of kind of basic human needs and where maybe some of our motivation comes from, Maslow explains as well in his theory, and many of you, I'm sure, have already been exposed to his theory. But basically, he says that our most basic needs kind of have to be met before we're able to expand out and get into some of those growth needs, right? Things like the need for self-actualization or even kind of esteem needs. So what he says is that we have kind of this drive reduction at play where we're striving for optimal functioning, right? We also have this need to be kind of aroused and stimulated and challenged. And we need to feel confident. We need to feel like we have value and a purpose. We need to feel a sense of autonomy and control over what we're doing. And kind of social connectedness, right? We all have a need for relatedness. Now, while we all have these needs, we vary in terms of how much we need the need or we have the need, right? So some people might not have as strong of a need for relationships or relatedness as others, as just kind of an example. So, another concept that Ormrod talks about in this chapter is self-handicapping. And I like to kind of talk about this one with you guys as students because I think a lot of times, I mean, we all kind of do this to a certain extent. And I like this comic, so I think this describes the experience of a student well. So a student passes by and says, there's an exam Friday, are you studying? And he's like, nah, I got this. I only need to study the night before. And maybe subconsciously he's thinking, like, what's the point? I'm just going to fail it anyway. I'm not a good student or something along those lines. And then, he's invited to join a study group and he says, oh, I don't want to overstudy. But in his head, he might be thinking, I'm just not a good test taker. I'm not a good student. I'm so going to fail. So then he gets his grade back and he sees a C and it kind of reinforces those beliefs, right? So that's this idea of self-handicapping, and what we see is that when students are engaging in this behavior, it tends to reduce their effort, which of course is going to then lower their performance and maybe even reinforce that belief, kind of that self-fulfilling prophecy. It can lead to cheating, procrastinating. Sometimes we take on too much. And that's another form of self-handicapping. And then Ormrod also talks about using alcohol or drugs or even setting really high unattainable goals as forms of self-handicapping. So what can we do to meet a lot of these basic needs that Maslow talks about in terms of self-worth? We want to give students scaffolds to support them. You remember that from Vygotsky's work. And we want to really minimize competition, where students are judging themselves based on their peers' performance. In terms of self-determination, we want to give students lots of opportunities to make choices, to feel autonomous. We want to evaluate their performance in a way that maybe is even collaborative with them, and provide lots of opportunities for them to take on the work on their own and the challenge on their own, of course, with supports. But we really need to encourage independence if we want students to feel some self-determination. Some factors that can influence self-determination. Students have to really have a sense of competency, but like I mentioned, you want to provide choices for them. You might have experienced this at work where you have a boss who's giving you lots of threats and deadlines, or giving you lots of kind of controlling messages, and you're just going to be a lot less likely to really want to take on the world and feel that sense of self-determination. One of the things Ormrod mentions is avoiding extrinsic rewards, and she kind of says how awful this is, right? To offer these outside incentives because it can potentially damage intrinsic motivation. But one important thing to keep in mind is that assumes that intrinsic motivation is present, right? And so in many cases, people just aren't intrinsically motivated to push through a task. And so in that case, extrinsic reinforcers might really make a lot of sense. And then finally, bosses and teachers and all of those types of folks want to really balance how much surveillance they provide and how much evaluation they're doing. So to get into kind of individual differences in motivation, which we've talked a lot about, I kind of mentioned again that people vary in their needs. So some people might have a really strong need for affiliation, which is the degree to which you want to kind of have friendly relationships with others, for example. There might be some people who really just prefer to work alone. You have people with a strong need for approval. So this is the desire to gain acceptance and maybe positive judgments. And what we see from research is that this can oftentimes be inversely proportional with self-esteem. And that kind of makes sense, right? Because much of your motivation, your maybe sense of self-worth is now kind of based on what others think about you, right? How they're judging you. We also see that for these students who have this strong need for approval, they're going to be more likely to engage in tasks where they think there's going to be some type of notoriety or maybe accolades gained. But if they're in a situation like that and they think they won't be able to achieve it, they might be more likely to then self-handicap. And then finally, the need for achievement. And this is what we think is maybe kind of the most helpful in terms of learning, right? So this is just the need to achieve excellence for its own sake, right? Because you want to challenge yourself and you want to reach the peak. So this tends to lead to more realistic and persistent thinking in terms of motivation. So this last half of the podcast, we're going to talk about affects and how it influences learning and cognition. So in addition to motivation, we know that your mood is really important. And the more that we can kind of do mood boosters when we're teaching you, so even things like making learning fun or kind of game-like, the more you're going to really learn. So we want to adjust task difficulty to a level that students feel like they can actually tackle. We also want to have students kind of questioning themselves and helping them to focus on the positive aspects of their learning. So what really excites me about this topic, or what did I enjoy learning about in this unit? Those types of things are going to help create more positive affect, which is again going to positively influence learning. Now, on the flip side of this, sometimes people feel anxiety in the classroom, and that can have both a facilitating effect and a debilitating effect. So anxiety can be kind of state anxiety, where it's just a temporary thing. We're just feeling it in the moment, maybe, or at the present state of mind we're in, or trait anxiety, which means that you just tend to be kind of an anxious person. You have this trait. And then, as I mentioned, anxiety can be healthy and facilitating, but it can also cross into impairing or debilitating. And if you look at the little graphic here, This is what we call the Yerkes-Dodson law. So, on the one hand, you can have kind of the Bob Marley who maybe is low on stress or anxiety, and they're just not going to get a lot done because they have no worries, right? No worries, man. Now, on the other hand, you have someone who's maybe like a nervous Nelly, and they're just constantly so freaked out about everything and anxious about everything that they almost can't even function, right? They're disorganized, their thoughts might be disorganized and kind of clouded up with these anxious thoughts or catastrophic thoughts. So where we kind of want to be is somewhere in the middle. You want to have enough anxiety to make you alert and to help you to maybe study, to encourage you to engage in studying behaviors, but not so much that you're almost paralyzed, right? And anxiety can come from a lot of places. It can, if you're in a place where your physical safety is at risk, you're not going to be studying. If you're in a situation where you feel like your self-worth might be attacked, or your physical appearance is stressing you out, or you're in a new situation, you guys know the sources of anxiety. I probably don't need to review that with you. So I want to show you this cool video about an intervention that was done to help alleviate test anxiety. And we actually do, this is kind of a hokey experiment, but we see from legit experiments that this strategy can actually have some really positive effects on reducing test anxiety and increasing performance.
We'll see.
The next day, right before the test, I'm stressed out. I'm really aggravated that I'm almost positive I'm going to fail the test.
I feel nervous. I feel like I'm going to fail all of a sudden.
And you get like butterflies because you're not sure if you remember everything.
Sound familiar? Stressing out before a test is something almost anyone can relate to. And even though you've studied, all that anxiety may cause you to choke under pressure and get a lower grade. But a new study finds just writing down those fears before taking a test can help you do better.
We have a pop quiz today.
We decided to test it out in our own unscientific experiment. 2 different classes, same pop quiz.
And try to get your thoughts on paper.
But we asked one of the classes to write down their feelings about the quiz before they took it.
I'm feeling kind of nervous because I'm not sure what's going to be on the quiz.
Well, I'm feeling okay, no type of anxiety. I guess I'm relaxed because I'm on track. I don't know what's going to be on it, so I'm just surprised and scared because I don't want to fail it.
So what were the results? The class that did not write about their feelings scored an average of 69 on the pop quiz. And the class that did write about their emotions, well, their average score was 73, 4 points higher. So are you guys surprised that your class did better?
This doesn't surprise me because it's therapeutic almost in a way, and it helps you get out all those emotions so you're not really thinking about it. On the test, you're more just thinking about the material and the test-taking strategies.
I didn't think it would really make a difference writing out your feelings. I never would have thought of that,
We poured out how we felt or our feelings on paper. Meanwhile, the other class, they went and they took the test, nervous.
He's right. The researchers who conducted the study say all that nervous energy is interfering with the thinking and reasoning skills needed during an exam, making it harder to focus and remember what you've studied. They say writing down your fears helps you find the source of stress and calm yourself down, allowing for your brain to focus all its energy on the task at hand, remembering the right answer. The writing exercise doesn't just apply to test taking. Experts say taking the time to write out what's in your head can help you increase your attention span, fall asleep at night, and even fight off diseases. But this technique only works for those who are more likely to be stressed out, and not for those who are already calm and confident.
When I'm going to take the test, just know that I'm going to pass it. And then I feel like, you have to be cocky with it.
Would any of you be more likely to use this technique before a test that you're kind of feeling anxious about?
If it's going to help me, pass the test, then I'll do anything to pass.
Jessica Kumari, Channel 1 News.
All right, so you see that that's one simple strategy we can use to help students keep their anxiety at a healthy level for test taking. But some other things we can do just in general is communicate really clear and concrete, realistic expectations for performance. We can help match our instruction to our students' capabilities and provide them with a lot of structure, right? Especially for those kids who are maybe just naturally kind of anxious. And then finally, we might want to provide additional supports, especially when we know students are going to be engaging in kind of really challenging tasks. We can help teach strategies to students to improve their performance, and we can assess them kind of individually and independently of peers. That's another way to reduce some anxiety. Providing feedback about specific behaviors rather than just kind of generally saying, you're not performing well, those types of things. And then finally, setting up situations where no single mistake is going to be fatal. So it's okay to make mistakes because that's part of learning. And then finally, to kind of create that motivating environment, we really want to find the things that students are intrinsically motivated to engage in and capitalize on that, right? We also want to help build up their confidence in a task because that's going to increase their motivation and give them a sense of autonomy as well. We also know that when all else fails, extrinsic motivation can be a powerful way of increasing motivation and promoting learning. In terms of the feedback we give students, they really should, the feedback should really help build up the students' sense of competence and self-determination. So it's important that we're careful about how we give feedback. And we know that students are going to be much more likely to focus if their more basic needs have been met, right? That comes from Maslow. And then finally, assessments are going to be much more effective in terms of motivation when students actually see that they connect with their future goals. So if I can take learning theory and show you all of the ways that this is going to be relevant to your life in the future, again, you're going to be much more likely to really be motivated to engage in the course and studying for exams and all of those types of things. So that's it for today's podcast. You can go into the discussion board and post your reflection for the podcast and the chapter material.